I'm Bill Oughton of Oughton Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster. Hey, Chantal, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Today, we're
Happy-
going to talk about listener questions.
Yes, and Happy New
Oh,
Year.
and Happy New Year. Yes. It
Yay!
is 2025.
Oh my God.
The year just snuck up on me so fast. I can't believe how fast time goes as you get older and things just happen. And now it's Christmas hit, and then the next thing you know, it's going to be June again.
Right. And
So,
speak for yourself about getting older. I mean, look at
well,
me.
I know you're not aging,
Yes.
but some of us
Um,
do. Some of us mere mortals still age.
That's true. That is true. Yes, we do have listener questions, and I'm super excited about this. This is one of our five listeners.
Mhm.
And I'm super excited because we don't really have a lot of interaction with our listeners. So I am excited. Please feel free to send us in questions. I love
Yeah,
that.
you can reach us on many different channels. I think there's a messaging thing on Spotify through the podcast, but I'm not positive about that. I know you can make a comment on the YouTube
You can.
videos.
You can.
And if you don't like to do either of those things, we're on LinkedIn. You can
Yeah.
find us. So
You
it's
we are
William Oughton, Chantal Roberts. I think there's even links in the show notes. So
yeah, they're so we're so easy to find us.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So this question came from somebody I've known for many years. It's my friend Dave Iadanza, and he is an insurance professional, has been in the business for a very long time, and he knows a lot of people, and he's very smart about things. But he has a question about auto liability. Why don't you pitch the question for us?
Okay, so Dave's question is actually really, really good. And I have worked these kind of claims before. So Dave has asked about liability coverage when the vehicle is stolen and thieves cause bodily injury while maybe they're driving the car and or property damage to the car while it's been stolen. And he also asked a follow-up question if there is or are responsibilities from you as the owner for this car being stolen if the car was stolen without keys. And I am assuming he's talking a lot about, those, what was it, Kias or Hyundais or whatever,
I
where
think
everybody was
both of
on
those.
TikTok, talking about like, hey, break into this car. And
Yeah,
I've actually worked a lot of these kind of claims. And we can also talk about this is a great question because we not only talk about liability of it, but the property damage of it, which coverages are going to be hitting. We can also talk about subrogation. So it's going to be an info-packed podcast, like always. So, yeah, yes.
great. My knowledge of the personal auto policy is pretty basic. I mean, I could handle a claim if it came across my desk, but on a nuanced question like this one,
Mm.
probably have to reach out for some help. So that's why I'm asking you some of these questions today. I'm gonna review what he says here and tell you what initially comes to my mind.
Sure.
And you know me, I'm a general liability guy.
Yep.
So I'm always thinking about whose fault it is. And my initial thing is that if the car was broken into and the ignition system was somehow hacked by this person, and to no knowledge of the owner, it'd be very difficult in my mind to assign any liability to the person who owns the car. That'd be different if they left the keys out. That might change liability a little bit. But I still think that if your biggest fault is leaving the keys in your driveway one day, that doesn't necessarily make you liable for an auto accident that happens 10 miles away after somebody steals it. So that's my train of thought, and I'll let you respond to that.
I would agree. I agree.
Okay.
Even if we accidentally left the keys in the car or we didn't lock the door, I know when I was living in Arkansas one time, my husband had a note on his windshield one morning from the Little Rock police. And what the police were doing is driving up and down our streets, popping doors open and seeing if anybody had left the doors unlocked. And if they did, they very kindly locked the doors, shut them again, and then put a little note saying, "Hey, you forgot to lock your doors. Please be sure to lock your doors, prevent crime, these sorts of things." And I thought, this is a great idea.
That's interesting.
Good publicity, you know? Anyway, but even if we accidentally left our doors unlocked or something to that effect, maybe even left our car and the keys in the car, uh, I would agree. You got to look for liability to begin with that ABCD rule that I always talk about. Is there a duty? Did that duty get breached? Was that breach of that duty the proximate cause? I don't necessarily know if there's a duty to keep the keys on you at all times. It's just smart to do it, but I don't think that you've breached any kind of liability. So in that aspect, I would agree. When we're talking about some thieves taking your car and doing joy rides, and maybe they hit someone and they cause bodily injury, I do not think that you would be responsible. Now, can you have a claim put on your policy? Sure. Can you be sued? Yeah, probably. I mean, everybody can be sued for everything. I think and I kid you not, I have seen these claims where the joyrider has hit something and they've gotten bodily injury and they try to put in a PIP claim, a personal injury protection or med pay claim on your policy because they were in your car that they have stolen. And you're like, dude,
It reminds me of the story about the thief who falls through the skylight into the kitchen and lands on the knife and gets cut by the knife and sues the
yeah.
homeowner.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes nobody said thieves or robbers were very bright. And so there you go. Could they do this? Yes. Would there be coverage? I don't know. I think I would have to look at the policy on that one. I would
Oh,
think
the
that
policy language is going to be important in all these, and
absolutely.
not being able to just draw it out in my memory is going to be the
I
kind of the problem that I have today.
Well, I can pull up the policy, but I don't want to. I'm just going to speak off the cuff and just act like I know what I'm doing, like I
Sure,
normally do. I mean,
sure. Well, in this conversation, the phrase that comes to mind is permissive use, and
well, yes. I also
so
want to say i- illegal acts.
yes, yeah, because
I
that's an
mean,
exclusion.
yeah, it's an exclusion. So if this driver stole your car, which, I mean, that's an illegal act, I don't think there's going to be coverage, period, for that driver. Now, here's the deal. There would be property damage coverage for your car, even though it got stolen. Like,
Yes,
like
that's
that
under
driver hit a person, it's under collision or comprehensive, whichever one they
that's
hit.
interesting because if you had comprehensive and collision, the collision would cover when it collides with something and causes damage. And I
Mhm.
don't know that it is dependent on whether or not it's someone authorized to drive the vehicle. But theft is part of the comprehensive coverage.
Right.
So I wonder
Exactly.
if you'd have a like if you I've seen some policies will have a separate deductible for
Yeah.
both coverages.
Yeah.
So the carrier has to decide whether this damage is from theft or collision.
I think they're going to go ahead and choose the collision because theft would be like the complete disappearance
Right,
and or the complete destruction of. Like
right.
let's say it burns and it ends up in the tow yard and that's how the police find it.
Well,
I think
vandalism falls under that coverage as well, doesn't it?
yeah, but I just think that I don't know. Again, you're right. It would go off of what the carrier rules would be, and then of course what your policy says.
I think
And
that it's fact dependent. So
Of
If
course,
if
every
this
plan is.
if this thief was a very safe driver, okay, and
All
and
thieves are.
and simply ran a red light and T-boned somebody, that's definitely a collision. But
Absolutely.
if this was a joyride through a parking lot where they were sideswiping every parked car there for fun, that sounds a little more like vandalism to me than collision,
Yes, if this is like Mayhem doing the parking lot run as he was
right?
late because he was the mascot and he was running late,
Right.
that one, yeah, that one would be vandalism, joyriding kind of deal.
Yeah.
And if Mayhem took your car, then yes. So regardless, your insurance would pay for that car. Now, what may happen, and again, I have heard of insurance companies doing this, is let's say that the thieves are caught and your car is returned to you by the police, even if it's banged up. I have heard or I have heard from insureds to saying that they have been told by their adjusters that their policy will not cover this, that they've got to file this through the thieves or the joyriders or the robbers or whomever, whatever we want to call them, their policy, their auto policy or homeowners policy or whatever kind of policy they may have, or just have them pay out of pocket. This would be incorrect because here's the deal. You could get your car repaired. You will have to pay the deductible, but then there would be subrogation.
Sure.
Your insurance company, the whole purpose of your insurance company is to help you out of a bind.
Yeah, well, that's, the collision and comprehensive are the first party components of the
Mm,
coverage. And it's the part that you pay for as a policyholder for the benefit of getting your stuff put back to the way it was prior to the incident. Same with
absolutely.
a homeowner's policy. You've got the first party part of it that pays for a new roof. And so I'm not going to say regardless of the cause, you'll have coverage. That's not really what I'm saying. But in a sense, if there's a collision loss and it meets the definition of a collision, doesn't matter if it's somebody else's fault. If you've got the first party coverage, it's available to you, less your
Yes.
deductible.
Yes.
And
Because
yes, they have subrogation then as well. I mean, I get a lot of questions from people that ask about, I got in a car with an accident with another vehicle. It was their fault.
right,
Do I go through my own insurance company or through theirs?
right.
And that's a choice people have to make. It happens on with homeowners claims too, believe it or not. But in auto, it's the best demonstration of it because you've got this coverage available to you that you can take advantage of. The only thing it's going to cost you is your deductible, which is a drag, right? If you got $1,000 deductible, you got to pay that out of pocket and then hope that the subrogation works out. So that's one avenue. The other avenue is that, well, and you may also have um, rental car coverage
Mm,
that will kick in that will
mm,
pay you. Now, if you go after the other insurance company, if you make a claim against the other car's liability coverage, they owe you rental car coverage too, because if your car's in the shop, they got to put you back in the place you were. So technically, if you drive a great big SUV, they've got to give you a great big SUV, not a little,
yes.
matchbox car, which
Which,
you may have to take if you bought the rental car coverage under your own policy.
right, because there are some limitations when you have rental on your own policy, such as $25 a day or
The
$30
daily
a
limit or
day.
something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
And I think that this is a very good point to make, that many adjusters don't understand and many adjusters don't get is that yes, you absolutely can file, or the insured can file on their own policy when there is a covered cause of loss, and then you, as the adjuster, turn around and subrogate.
as
Uh,
the adjuster, yes.
as the insurance company. And you would, by the way, guys, you would pursue the insured's deductible, And I usually, as the adjuster, pursue any non-covered items.
Yeah.
For example, oh, I don't know. Let's say they didn't have renters rental coverage on my policy, and the insured paid for rental coverage out of their own pocket. I would say, okay, insured had a $500 deductible. They also paid $52 a day for 3 weeks to get the car repaired for rental. You would pay that amount to Mr. and Mrs. Insured. You pay me X amount for the repairs of the vehicle. And I got to tell you, I have also, again, as an insured, gone through my own insurance company because I just don't want to mess around with the liability adjuster.
Well,
I
that's
love
the
you.
other big drawback is you got to get
Mm,
into an argument about whose fault it was.
hmm
And you may think it's the other 100% the other driver's fault. And the other driver at the scene may have said something along the lines of, I'm so sorry. I made a mistake. This is my fault. I have insurance coverage, no problem. Gets to the adjuster's desk and they review the police report and they look at the diagram of the scene and they think, well, I think this was more like 50-50.
mm,
That's
mm,
when you lose your mind, right?
hmm
And then you are now in a position to be fighting with this adjuster over what you think happened versus what they think happened, and you've got to make the case for it.
Yes.
And that's a difficult position to be in. And you don't, if you've got the coverage, that's a better time to use it because then you can let them fight over the liability issues in the subrogation process.
Now, the next question you are going to get as an adjuster is from the policyholder is, will my rates go up? And the answer to that is, I don't know. I don't deal with rates. I recommend that you speak with your agent. What I also recommend to you as an adjuster is when you are sending out that subrogation letter to the at-fault party, if you know their insurance people, you're sending it to that at-fault adjuster. I would send it to that at-fault party. And I do maybe a BCC, a blind carbon copy to my insured so that my insured knows that I'm asking for these things for them. So that keeps everybody on the same page. I
Got
like
it.
to do that. I do like to copy the at-fault party along with their insurance company if I know who they are, because sometimes the insurance company doesn't want to do things, or sometimes if I'm just sending it to the at-fault party and not their insurance company, like let's say I don't know who the insurance company is, that at-fault party won't send it to their insurance company. So I do like
Right.
to keep everybody on the same page when I'm doing subrogation.
Yep. Yep.
And by the way, if you don't know, I tell my students this, subrogation is that fancy insurance word for reimbursement.
Yep.
And that is what subrogation is. I know a lot of companies go through like Cozen and O'Connor now, or they have subrogation units. Get your subrogation department involved early if you're not pursuing it yourself.
Well, back to the thieves here. We'll call them the bad guys.
Hmm.
When the bad guys steal your car, they don't really have the benefit of liability coverage to protect them, do they? Under your policy,
No, no, not under your policy. Um,
you will likely have coverage under the first party benefits for damage that they might do to your car, correct?
Yes. Oh, you know what? I also thought of another thing that we have done for people who have done criminal acts. And this is something that we have done for people who've done criminal acts like stealing a car. It's usually involving like theft of copper pipes or something to that effect. And those people may not have insurance for us to subrogate against, and they may not be the people who would have any kind of assets for us to put a lien against. Maybe they're renting, or something to that effect. It's not like we can garnish wages or something where we think we could get money back from. However, we know that they're going to go to trial because they've done something illegal, and you can send a letter to perhaps the police department asking that your amount that you have paid be put into the sentencing, or maybe the district attorney if it's gone that far. I have no idea. I usually send it to the police department if I happen to.
So we typically refer to that as a restitution request, and we
Yes,
send that to the district attorney's office,
there you go.
and they'll usually respond depending on the case.
Hmm.
And in my throughout my career, we've done that. Arson cases, we'll get
Yes.
restitution orders for that, where someone's definitely purposefully burned a building down. And if they
Yeah.
don't have any assets, it's difficult to collect sometimes.
Have you ever gotten money back?
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
too.
Sometimes it's been, $82.52 a month for 30
Yes.
years,
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So,
Yes. And it really kind of sucks because you have to keep your file open.
mhm.
And probably by the fifth or sixth month they quit paying. And
I
you know that. And it's just
I know that the previous carrier I was with probably still has open files that they're collecting restitution orders from. And it's funny because some of the cases involve people that really did feel remorseful about what they did.
mm,
And there would be times where we get a call saying, "Look, I'm I'm in a bind this month. I'm going to be late with this payment. I just want to let you know."
yeah.
It's like, man, don't you just feel
You do. You feel bad for
you
them.
feel
They
bad for
made
them,
they made a bad
but
decision,
it's a
but
court order, you can't really, I mean, it wouldn't even be within our power to forgive it, I don't think, without some sort of say by a judge. But anyway, that's what would happen in a case where your car gets stolen and it causes damage to somebody else. That person who has damage or injury could make a restitution order against the person who caused the damage.
right.
Collecting it is an entirely different animal, but there are ways to do it. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I
so if I were injured by by someone who stole a vehicle,
mm,
and maybe that's the root of Dave's question here. Um, I mean, he really asks if the owner is responsible if the car was stolen. So that's probably the crux of his question. But what comes to mind for me right now is if I was injured, um, what do I do? So I can find out who the car owner is and try and make a claim there. And we've already determined that their insurance company probably isn't going to contribute to any bodily injury claims for that incident. The next step would be to find out who was driving and then find out if they were arrested and then find out who the district attorney is and let them know what happened and your plight and what your claim might be. Um, might be worth getting an attorney to help you with that,
right.
but that's kind of the boat you're in if you're injured in a situation like that, is that you're going to have to chase down the at-fault party and hopefully extract some money from them for your damages sometime.
So I did go ahead and I caved and I pulled up our standardized personal auto policy. It is the PP 00010918. So this is our standardized policy. Of course, every policy is going to be different. And I'm looking at Part A liability coverage. So if our joyriders, our bad guys, injure a person in the theft of your automobile, the insuring agreement for this Part A liability coverage says we're going to pay damages for bodily injury or property damage for which any insured, which would be you as the owner of the vehicle, becomes legally responsible because of an auto accident. And I think the words that we need to pay attention to are legally responsible. And that's where, again, we're going to be talking about our liability aspects. And you are our liability expert, Bill.
Sure. So, we deal with negligence and liability claims all the time. And yeah, the policy holder, the insured person, has to have been negligent. And if they somehow contributed to maybe the acts, all right, let's talk about the bad guy. Let's say the bad guy is a neighbor, and the bad guy has a history of stealing things, lawnmowers, mini bikes, cars, and you know this.
Mm-hmm.
And you leave your car in the driveway or running one evening and you forget about it because you're watching the news or whatever. And you go out to check on it and the car's gone. And that guy, of course, he stole the car because that's what he does. And you knew that. And you left the keys in there. Some liability could attach to you. It's almost, there's a doctrine called negligent entrustment.
Yes.
And if you actually let the person take the car and they got into a wreck, well, that'd be a situation where you should have known better. We get in those cases, or we get cases like that a lot involving ATVs, mini bikes, recreational type vehicles, because people will let their kid operate the thing, knowing that the kid really isn't responsible enough because they're only 9 years old or whatever to be operating the thing, and they go injure somebody with that. Well, then that's a is it respondent superior? But it's definitely negligent entrustment, meaning that you should have known better before giving the keys to somebody who was not responsible enough to handle the thing.
It's interesting that you say that because I'm going through here real quick and it was something that I wanted to bring up, which is this idea as well. And we're going to slightly go, I guess, left of center real quick off of the topic, but it is somewhat tangential. Is those are the people who have regular access to your car because I am a member of the Big I Ask an Expert, and we just received a question about the stepmom who has a stepdaughter come and stay like during the summer or during Christmas break or whatever. And how should the stepmom put the stepdaughter onto her policy? And I had said, well, you need to know that if the daughter has access to your keys, she's going to be an insured, whether she lives there like full time or not, kind of deal, because she has access to those keys. And I'm looking right here under Part B, medical payment coverage. So that's the med pay, the PIP, the warm and fuzzy aspect going back to our joyriders slash neighbor or whatever, of course, it says we're going to pay reasonable expenses for bodily injury caused by an accident sustained by an insured. It also says exclusions sustained while occupying without a reasonable belief that the insured is entitled to do so. Like the insured, of course, we're still talking insured, which would be you, not the joyrider. But
Mhm.
if the insured gives access to that vehicle, they that person could be considered to be an insured.
Yes.
I mean, I'm going to look up the definition of an insured real quick. So you go ahead and finish talking, but this is something that we really have to talk about.
So I'll give you my cursory understanding and my foggy understanding of it, and you've got the policy. You can tell me
Uh-huh.
if I'm right or wrong. My guess is that you are allowed to let somebody borrow the vehicle, and if you do, they're covered. But if you got like a teenager living at home and he's going to drive your car on a fairly regular basis, you better have that person on the policy because if
Yes.
they live there and they're using the vehicle regularly,
Mhm.
I don't think they're going to be considered an insured. And I
Okay.
don't know where the line is. So that's, some of my weaknesses on the auto side.
And I'm like that too. Okay, so family member is defined. Family member means a person related to you by blood, marriage, or adoption who is a resident of your household. This includes a ward or foster child. Now, again, I'm thinking resident of your household. The neighbor wouldn't count, but this stepdaughter who comes and lives with you for 2 or 3 weeks out of a year may be considered to be a resident of the household. Now, insured for our liability is you or any quote family member for the ownership, maintenance, or use of any auto. So that's again where we're getting into this ability to grab a key. And I know a lot of people don't want their teenagers put on the policy because their policies are going to go through this roof. Yeah, but it probably would be covered, but the problem is going to be you may be dropped because you didn't bother telling the insurance company, or it's gonna go through the roof anyway. I mean, your policy premiums are gonna go through the roof because not only have you, not told the insurance company, but they've had an accident and now the insurance company knows that there is a teenager driver. Any person using your covered auto is seen as an insured. So that's going to be like the permissive use.
Right.
So yeah, so that's where we get on that definition. So insured in the auto policy is pretty broad.
It can be, yeah, it sounds
Yeah.
like. So, um, I had talked about with you offline about Reddit and a lot of the questions that get raised on Reddit, and there are a lot of auto related questions in terms of liability and even first party. And one that comes to mind is an entry by, and I believe this was Reddit. If not, it was one of the forums on Facebook, but I'm pretty sure it was Reddit because I think it was an anonymous post.
Mm,
And they were a new broker or agent, and a policyholder asked them about their teenage son
mm.
and whether or not they had to add him. And this person told them, no, he's fine.
Oh, no, no, no.
And
No, 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 no. You got to add them.
the next day he went out and wrecked the car and hurt six people or some crazy story,
Oh,
something along those lines. So Reddit is a font of stories like that make you cringe, and the responses can be range from scary to hilarious and somewhere in between. So
yeah, yeah. I would say, okay, so first of all, if we have any agents listening, and I do mean agents, not brokers, agents are the representatives of the carrier. Brokers are the representatives of our policyholders. I would also say our claims adjusters, staff adjusters, are our agents of the carriers. If you find out that Junior is driving a car, you have a duty to tell the carrier because notice to you as the agent or the insurance adjuster is notice to the carrier. And so failure to do that is how we get into that whole trouble with we had knowledge and we didn't do it. And have we waived any of our defenses? And I know New York is weird because you and I just attended a great webinar about not a reservation of rights letter in New York, although I always want to call it a reservation of rights, but waivers of coverage. And what did they call them? Declination letters or something to that effect?
denial or declination or
Yeah.
coverage disclaimer. One
So,
thing to remember about New York is that in this scenario where bad guy takes the vehicle, that rule about issuing a denial letter promptly, like 2 weeks, 30 days, definitely within 30 days. If you fail to do that, you could be barred from utilizing an exclusion that would apply. Now, in this case, if there was illegal activities, that's an exclusion. If you're going to rely on that exclusion to disclaim coverage for this event, and you don't do it within 30 days, you might be barred from using that disclaimer, which means, or that exclusion, meaning that you got to pick up coverage. But that rule does not apply when you've got a situation where coverage never existed in the first place. And I think that's what we would have here with the bad guy is coverage would never apply to him in the first instance because he's never been an insured. He could not qualify as an insured unless the policyholder let them operate the vehicle.
okay, so I would disagree with you.
Okay.
And I just want to hold that thought, put a pin in it real quick, because we also have Part C, uninsured motorist, and we have been talking about collision and comprehensive. But if our bad guys take a joyride, we could, if the insured has uninsured or underinsured motorist, uninsured in this particular instance where our bad guys don't have any insurance, we could possibly file a claim under our uninsured motorist coverage because that says we will pay compensatory damages for which an insured is legally entitled to recover from the bad guys. I'm paraphrasing ISO. However, here's the deal. Okay, so we're going back to the disclaiming of coverage for the bad guys. I don't, I think we can't disclaim coverage to our insured because of the bad guys. I think the bad guys insurance company would disclaim coverage if there is.
So yeah. So what that rule applies to is just liability and bodily
Yes.
injuries associated with liability. So it wouldn't apply to any of the first party coverages available to the insured, like the collision or the comprehensive or anything like that. And this is a bad example because I don't think that um, I don't think there's coverage available to begin with here. So I don't think you'd be barred from if you were late on a disclaimer
Mm,
and your disclaimer said this person, Mr. Bad Guy, does not qualify as an insured because here's the definition of an insured. I don't think you'd be barred from that disclaimer if you were late. However, if you were issuing that disclaimer solely on exclusions in the policy, written exclusions, like the illegal acts or
hmm.
something along those lines, and that's late, that's where you get into trouble. So you have to remember when there's an exclusion, those are the things that get barred. If there's no coverage to begin with at the outset, that's not really applicable to that 30-day rule.
Yeah, but I'm saying that there could be coverage because we have comprehensive, we have collision, and we have uninsured motorist
All right, so the
for our
compre
policyholder.
so the like I already said, you will have coverage for the comprehensive and collision.
Yes.
Any disclaimer you issue would be only relating to the liability that caused damage to somebody else, injury or damage to somebody else. So that's where the disclaimer would be. As far as the uninsured,
Okay.
as far as the uninsured motorist coverage goes,
That again goes to
that
the
only
insured.
applies, yeah, that only applies if the insured person has damages that the other party won't cover. So I don't see that even happening in this scenario.
Okay, so I'm looking, why can't I find like a legal acts in the auto policy?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it off of my feeble memory. So,
No, no, like I'm doing a word search. Like
uh-huh.
illegal doesn't come up. What else would it be called? Stolen. Oh, fun with us.
We might be mixing policy forms here.
What?
A personal auto policy generally does not cover damages or injuries resulting from illegal acts, meaning that if you are involved in a car accident while committing a crime, your insurance company is likely to deny coverage. Intentional acts, it's
It's
under the intentional acts section.
intentional. Okay. Intentional. Okay, exclusions. We do not provide liability coverage for, but it says for any insured who intentionally causes bodily injury or property damage. Well, our insured is not intentionally causing bodily injury or property damage because our insured did not agree to have their car stolen.
Right.
So I think you're correct in that aspect that there would be absolutely no coverage. However, I know you were saying that there's not a disclaimer letter. I do feel that a disclaimer of liability still would be wise to any claimant who is alleging bodily injury and filing on the policy because it kind of ties everything up in a nice little bow. I mean, you can send a
Sure.
disclaimer of coverage letter saying that there's no coverage
You absolutely should. Yes.
and therefore there is no liability. Because remember, and I'm not afraid to admit this, it did take me a minute, a couple of years actually, to realize that there is a two-step process in liability. You got to go through the coverage aspect and then you get to the liability aspect. Or you can go through the
Right.
liability and then go see if there's coverage. But you have to have the check mark in both boxes. There has to be both coverage and liability or responsibility for the policy to respond. And no one ever explained that to me, like broke it down to me like that, even though I understood it. It just took me a minute to figure it out that it's two separate events because we entangle them so much.
It does. It does. A lot of people, especially new folks, get wound up in the liability and coverage dilemma,
Mhm.
and they'll say, "But it's not their fault." But it doesn't matter whose fault it is. There's no coverage.
Right.
So you figure out the coverage first, because
Yes.
if there is coverage, then you can flesh out the liability because you've got to defend it. If there's no coverage, you don't care about liability anymore because you're not even going to defend it anymore. What you're
Exactly.
saying is that this event is not covered under the policy. But the insured was at fault. That's not the
Okay.
issue.
Yeah.
Even if they
This
were at fault, there's no coverage and they have to handle this on their own.
Right. And that is something too, it's very hard for claimants to understand. And I know we were talking about Reddit and how there are new adjusters out there on Reddit wanting mentors and everything. And so if you're a mentor, this might be something that you break down to your mentee. And that is, okay, first you got to have those two steps. Is there coverage? No. Well, you never get to the liability part. But remember, nobody understands insurance, so your claimant is not going to get that. This person hit me. Yeah, absolutely. That person hit you, but they didn't pay their insurance bill, so they don't have coverage.
Right.
So they're going to have to pay for that out of their own pocket
Yep.
or whatever.
The coverage and liability is a two-step process, and then damages is also a two-step process because um, you've got the special and the general damages. And when it comes to determining liability, what I do generally is I figure out damages first, and I figure out damages with the hat on that this is a 100% liability situation, and then I apply liability later. So if I think the case is worth $100,000 full value, but I think it's a 50-50 split, then I apply that. And then, then we say, okay, full value is 100,000. This is a $50,000 claim when it comes to the liability breakdown. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
well,
So
have we beaten this topic to death yet?
I think we have. I kind of think we have.
Poor, poor Dave. Dave, if you're listening, thanks so much for listening. And I miss you. You should stop by for a cup of coffee sometime.
Yeah, Dave. Drop
Yeah,
us a
Dave.
note. If you
Yeah.
actually, any other of our three out of four listeners have
Yeah.
questions, feel free to drop us a note. Ask us questions.
Yeah, ask us
We,
questions, and if you're too bashful, post it on Reddit. We'll find you there, and we'll talk about it there.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, maybe we can start answering some of these questions on Reddit.
That's a good idea.
The subreddit, of course, is adjusters.
There's several. So the subreddit is claims adjusters, insurance claim. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah.
I can't recite them all. But if you type in claims adjusting or insurance claims or anything like that, you'll find a bunch of topics that people are talking about. And there's some really interesting questions. There's some interesting takes on the industry. There's some very specific information on the inner workings of some carriers. They
Yes.
don't tell you who they are, but you can get some insight as to how these bigger carriers sometimes operate, and sometimes it's not good.
Mm-mm. No, no, which is regrettable.
Yeah.
But there you go.
Good talking to you, Chantel. We'll see you
Yes,
again next time.
absolutely. In 2 more weeks,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
guess, or something like that. All right. We'll see you then.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.autin.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.